A white door in a dark space. Someone knocks on it. Behind this door you can hear voices, as parents ask their child Don what he wants to be in the future, and he answers that he wants to be a doctor. The Don boy went to the door and pulled on the handle to open it. Behind this door stood two men with glasses and suits. They said hello to the boy and asked if his name was Donggu. These people said that they are working together with his parents and they have bad news for him. His parents have disappeared since the last survey and have not been found. They offer their deepest condolences to the boy and say that he has no relatives left, so he will have to move to an orphanage. While talking about all this, they show their ID cards, which say that they come from the police. The boy opened his mouth in shock and looked at the two men, but behind him was a guy. Most likely it was him, but from the future, these men said that when he turns 18, the boy will get $5 million and can use it as he wishes. But for now, his money will be kept in the bank, said one of the men with glasses. A man holds out a form for the boy to sign. On this form is a pen. The boy with trembling hands reaches out his hands and wants to take the form. The boy with trembling hands barely signs this form while crying, so this form becomes wet because of the tears on the pages. The boy gives the form back to one of the men and tells the other that in a while a car will pick him up to take him to the orphanage and that he will have a few days to gather all the necessary things. The men say goodbye to him and lastly tell him that they are very sorry for him. The boy looks at them with a very sad face, and behind him stands the same one who came from the future and with tears in his eyes listens to all these. The boy closed the door behind the two strangers who had told him of this terrible news. The boy starts crying, baring his teeth. Behind him is the same guy, but only from the future. This guy starts crying, too. The young man reaches out his thin, pale hand to the little boy, that is, to his childhood self, while at the same time he is crying. The boy suddenly rushes into the arms of this young man, but he was not ready for such an embrace, and he did not know what to do. He was in shock. The young man begins to calmly and caringly stroke the boy's head without stopping crying and begs and pleads for him to promise to keep his word. Instead of a small boy, you can see a skull with many eyes sticking out of it and octopus tentacles coming out of his chin. Some incomprehensible green liquid is oozing out of his mouth and his eyes have turned red. The young man asks him to keep his word and become a doctor in the future. Suddenly, the young man's eyes turn red and he looks angrily at this boy. He rose abruptly from the bed, screamed, but then realized it was a dream, a terrible, horrible, horrible dream. He was still in shock for some time, breathing very loudly and heavily. His head ached terribly, and he grasped it with his hand. The guy still holding his head turned around to see if there were any pills on the nightstand. He noticed that there were his antibiotics that would help him with this headache. He held out his hand while his jar of antibiotics fell and scattered pills all over the table. At the same time, a very important paper fell off the table. The paper fell to the wooden floor next to the bed. This paper was a medical report that concluded this guy has a malignant brainstem tumor. It was already morning. The guy was sitting on the bed, holding his head and remembering his terrible dream. Tears slowly flowed from his eyes. He looked forward, tears pouring from his red eyes. He remembered his parents. He reached for the table where his pills were, but this time he didn't reach for the pills. He took the cigarettes, whispering, "I'm sorry," under his breath. The guy got out of bed, picking up a pack of those red cigarettes. He opened them, but it was the pack that was empty. He deliberately stuck his finger in there to see if it was definitely empty. The guy looked angrily at this packet and realized that his day was already bad from the morning. He clutched this packet in his hand. The guy stood on the terrace and looked at the sky and the ocean. The sky was more calm. It was shrouded in big, white, not very thick clouds, and the ocean was violent. The only thing they had in common was immensity. The guy couldn't see the end of either the sky or the ocean. The guy was on a liner that sailed on the Indian Ocean. The day was good. In the morning, the sun was baking, and it was a little cloudy. These big, thick clouds resembled huge lumps of cotton candy. The boat sailed on the ocean, cutting the water. The guy was standing outside his hotel room. He stood and watched and thought about his parents. He thought about himself, his parents. He said his name was Donggu. He was 21 years old. When he was 10 years old, his parents disappeared during a research trip. The guy walked back his room further. Reflecting on his life, he said he had no relatives. And until he was 18, he lived in a house after he got $5 million, and decided to go to Eastern Medical School. The guy went to the bathroom, opened the faucet, and started washing his face. The guy knew that $5 million meant nothing to rich people, but to him, it was a lot of money. After washing his face, he took his hands off his face and looked at himself in the mirror. He further thought about the fact that for him, for a guy who grew up without parents, that amount of money was very huge, and he could live a long life without difficulties. Having so much money, he studied hard to enter this institute. The boy leaned on the sink, looking at his reflection in the mirror. He remembered the speech he'd given at the opening ceremony, the one they'd thought was the best, rich and handsome, the one God hadn't overlooked. The guy looking at his reflection in the mirror remembered the moment he stood there dressed nicely in a white jacket. Brown shirt, black tie said that there is only one patient in the world, and that is poverty. The guy stood on stage speaking into a microphone. He believed that poverty was the only disease that people should cure humanity of. All this had a very strong influence on the guy. The guy forgot about his main desire, to become a doctor, and started to live in luxury, living his life. Every day he disappeared in bars with his friends. He had fun there and spent his money. He was dancing on the dance floor, swinging money. He was having a lot of fun, surrounded by a crowd of people and girls with whom he didn't know what boredom was. The guy was always disappearing with some girls, and that's why he almost never went to class. In his school days, he was considered a rising star, but at the institute, he became the son of a rich prostitute. And then 6 months ago, when the guy went to the doctor for a checkup, he was diagnosed with brain cancer. The doctor sitting in the chair told the boy about this terrible news, which shocked him. He went to all the hospitals in his town, and all the doctors said that he had no more than 9 months to live. He attacked all the doctors because he didn't want to accept the fact that his life was about to end. The guy fell on his knees in front of the doctor. Tears were pouring from his eyes. The doctor stood in shock and did not understand what to do, so Donggu gave up and stopped trying to find a cure. He realized that his life was coming to an end. He cried, gritting his teeth. He understood that soon there would be a lot of rumors about him in the institute. The son of a rich prostitute is dead. He did not want to accept this fact. Donggu, in the bathroom, looking at his reflection in the mirror, realized that he needed to return to a harsh reality that would not be as pleasant as his past life. A guy picking out clothes tells us that this summer he invested a lot of money in the orphanage that raised him. The guy also tells us how he's going on a cruise he's been dreaming about for a long time. He's going on a trip through the volcanic belt in the Indian Ocean. The guy pulled on the white doorknob. He was wearing a black shirt. The door slowly opened and he stepped forward. His shoes were black boots and he was wearing beige pants. He wanted to get on this cruise because in this place a tragedy happened that drastically changed his life. He stood looking at the sky and the ocean, reflecting on the fact that this was the exact spot where his parents had disappeared on that fateful day. Suddenly, while Donggu was watching and enjoying the view, a very cute girl ran up to him and happily informed him that his eyeliner was ready. Donggu looked at her and said he was ready. The girl warned him to bring a jacket because it would be chilly in the submarine. The girl was a little confused and told the guy that the captain wanted to give something to Donggu. The guy looked at the girl with incomprehension, but did not say anything. Donggu. Together with that girl walked along the pool. She was showing him the way. He thought he had invested a very huge and large amount of money in this trip. He was coming down the stairs with this girl, talking about how he was treated like a king here on this cruise. When he and the girl came down, he noticed that there were 4 other people standing next to the submarine. Then he told us that on this ship, there were many other rich people who were treated the same way as him. Donggu and the girl were standing next to the stairs parallel to listening to the squeals of some girl who was asking who he was. Suddenly, a man ran up to Mr. Gu. It was most likely the guy who would operate their submarine. Behind this man stood 3 people, a girl and 2 guys. The man told him that these people were very eager to go, and he knew that Donggu was planning an individual trip. The man whispered in the young man's ear that these people should not be rude in any way. He asked the boy to get into his position. The girl started saying that they would pay him more than they promised, and then the sub would be theirs. Donggu started to say that there is plenty of space inside the submarine. If they want, they can join. If not, then they should find another submarine. The girl started getting angry and yelling at the guy. She started asking him who he was, where he came from. This girl was approached by a guy. He addressed her as Michelle. He said she better calm down and they would save some money. The girl turned around looking at the guy saying Jerry. Dong-gu accepted the fact that he would now dive down with the three men. He told them that these men should hurry up. Jerry thanked the guy, calling him bro. Dong-gu walked past the three men, followed by the man who would be driving their submarine. At this time, Jerry was being yelled at by Michelle, who was telling him that he had promised that it would all be a secret. Jerry waved it off, saying that fate had decided that, and that's just the way it happened. Young people started to climb into the submarine. Dong-gu climbed in first, followed by Jerry, then Michelle, and then Michelle climbed in third. The guy thought to himself for a long time that he would not give up this dive. They gradually descended into the depths. The submarine shone brightly in the deep ocean. Many fish swam above the submarine, jellyfish and even sharks. As Dong-gu said earlier, he would not give up this dive, because this was where his parents disappeared. Dong-gu, along with these strangers, lowered down on the sub in parallel, Jerry filming the happenings from the window of the sub, greeting his subscribers on his stream. Dong-gu sits first. Michelle sits behind him. Not far from Michelle sits Jerry, and behind him sits Derek. Jerry is filming them diving down to explore the seabed. Derek asks him if he is really sure that no one else knows about this operation. Jerry looks out the window and, holding up his phone, talks about getting Derek to calm down and not freak out about it. He says that even if someone knows about this operation now, they are here alone. Michelle looked at Jerry in bewilderment and said she was a little dubious about it. Jerry turned around angrily, still holding his phone. He said that they had heard the guy himself and that he was sure he was telling the truth, especially this area was too big to find them. Jerry unbuckles his seatbelt and says that this window is too dirty to shoot the view. He wants to move to another seat. Michelle saw this and yelled at him to be more careful, but Jerry waved it off as usual and told her it was fine and not to worry about him. The man who was driving their snorkel politely asked Jerry to sit down and fasten his seatbelt because it was shaking too much underwater and it was dangerous for him. Well, Jerry told him not to worry about him. The guy sat down on the first available seat and started filming on his phone as they sank to the bottom, while Dong-gu watched them carefully. He sat and watched and pondered that perhaps now he might be able to find the wreckage. Suddenly, the young man noticed in the distance some strange obelisk and stood completely alone around the already sunken ruins. Near it swam fish. Dong-gu tried to look closely and understand what it is. He was shocked at what he saw. He opened his eyes wide and leaned his hand against the glass. He realized that it was an obelisk and that it was 1,500 meters deep and had something written on it. Dong-gu noticed that this obelisk began to glow a bright red color, and a huge number of bubbles began to appear next to it. Suddenly, lava started oozing out of this obelisk. Dong-gu didn't realize it was lava because he was in shock. He opened his mouth and started screaming. He put his hands on his head. He started panicking. Abruptly, he started getting headaches, but he didn't take antibiotics with him. He closed his eyes. A horrifying picture appeared in front of Dong-gu, a huge red eye, and sticking out of it was a multitude of tentacles. Below were people, although this caricature could hardly be called human. Dong-gu stood in shock in front of a huge creature. It was a man, but instead of a head, it had octopus tentacles sticking out of its mouth. It was a giant kraken that could fly. It had huge wings behind it that resembled bat wings. It had tentacles. This kraken man was standing in a huge sea of blood. Dong-gu stood there and did not understand what to do because in front of him was this huge creature that could kill him at any time. The man who was leading them shouted to everyone to fasten their seatbelts. He was in a panic because he was afraid that something would happen to him and his boarding time. Dong-gu was still holding his hands on his head, grinning his teeth. He didn't understand what he should do or what was even happening now. Jerry started to scream in shock. Their submarine was caught in a water vortex. It was spinning from side to side with fish swimming around it and a huge amount of bubbles. Suddenly, their ship staggered. Dong-gu was still holding his hands on his head. Michelle and Derek were in shock. They didn't know what to do. Jerry, who was unbuckled, started to fall from his seat. He dropped his phone from his hand. The sub still kept darting from side to side. It kept spinning and spinning. Jerry started to fall down, screaming for help. But there was no help because all three passengers who were next to him were buckled up. Michelle started yelling that Jerry wasn't wearing his seatbelt and he would probably hurt himself. The guy started falling on Dong-gu, who was now having a panic attack. Suddenly, time stopped for long. He began to see opposite colors. Everything was like a fog. Suddenly, something rang, and in the same second, Dong-gu found himself near some pillar. Less than a minute ago, he was in a submarine that was in a water vortex. Dong-gu didn't realize what was happening. His pain was gone. He didn't know who was talking and where he was even. Dong-gu looked forward in shock and saw a huge obelisk at a depth of 1,500 meters. The obelisk said that the connection with the owner had been established. On this stand begins to appear a report on the condition of the owner. There was written, race, human, sex, male, age, 21, height, 182 centimeters, and so on. Dong-gu looked shocked and didn't understand what was going on, but he knew it was all his medical information. The booth kept on printing about his blood pressure, blood glucose levels. When the stand pronounced the fact that Dong-gu has a fatal anomaly in his cerebral cortex, he looked at this stand with his mouth open. Dong-gu walked up to this pillar and held out his hand. He lowered his head and remembered his illness that was taking up too much of his time. The booth started to say that the list of his missions is being updated. The owner will be able to get certain rewards for completing these missions. All missions are divided into 3 levels: medium, high, and nightmare. The owner will only be able to choose one of them. Dong-gu looked at this booth, still not understanding what was going on and how he was here. He listened attentively to everything this booth was saying. The booth kept saying that you are only allowed to have one quest, but once completed or expired, the quest list is updated the next day at 12 a.m. sharp. Booth started updating the list. Today was July 21st, July 2020. He started sounding out all the levels. The middle level talked about how he needed to help an emergency patient for a day. The reward would be a special cure for a malignant tumor. The cure could extend the person's life by 5 days. Dong-gu was still staring in shock at that booth, but he kept talking. He was saying that to fulfill the highest level he needed to dissect 3 human bodies within 3 days. The reward would be a box opener. Dong-gu watched and pondered whether he could survive if he completed these tasks. Continuing the voiceover, Booth reached the nightmare level. In the nightmare level, the assignment was that he needed to dissect Ghoul's body, but the reward was unknown. Dong-gu began to ponder that it was impossible. It was just nonsense. He wouldn't be able to find Ghoul. Suddenly, Dong-gu's starter set showed up on the obelisk. He could only pick it up once. Suddenly, some large stream of red-orange energy appeared near him. This stream was like fire, and it began to rotate in different directions. Dong-gu leaned back in shock because he was afraid to touch this energy. Instead of the fire that he had seen at the beginning, a strange creature appeared. It was the tentacles of an octopus with eyes sticking out of the tentacles. To get the set, one had to touch this slippery and scary, incomprehensible creature. Dong-gu looked at the creature with disgust. He didn't realize if it was even alive. He didn't want to touch it. He stretched out his trembling, pale, thin hand toward the creature. He was already ready to touch the creature when suddenly one of its tentacles completely enveloped Dong-gu's arm and pulled him towards its mouth. Suddenly, the octopus enveloped Dong-gu's whole arm with its tentacles and bit it. Dong-gu was very frightened and started to scream. After the bite, the octopus let go of Dong-gu's hand. He noticed that a strange purple poison had begun to eat away at his hand. Dong-gu's eyes turned red. Suddenly, steam started coming out of his eyes and hands. The pupils in his eyes disappeared, and the skin from his hand was almost disappearing. Dong-gu frantically screamed and fell to the floor. He lay on the floor for a little while. He seemed to be unconscious. The octopus began to quicken his pace and move towards the boy. He wanted to touch the young man with his tentacle, but he abruptly opened his eyes and opened his mouth. The guy quickly reacted and moved back, and the octopus began to rot and die. The same steam was coming out of that octopus that was coming out of Dong-gu's hand and eyes. Dong-gu looked at his hands. They were in some kind of strange fire. The guy was in a panic. He didn't know what to do. The only thing he could do was to shout, "My hands!" A picture of hands and a text about cold palms appeared on the booth. Dong-gu didn't understand what it meant. He was shocked. He looked at his hands, where the fire was coming from, and listened to everything the booth was telling him. He was talking about the ability of cold palms. This ability gives a doctor the ability to keep his hands calm at all times. That is, this ability could be compared to the skills of an experienced surgeon. Dong-gu felt a strange sensation, apparently because of his new ability. The boy shouted sharply. He wanted to know what this system was, and if it was related to his parents. The booth started repeating the same words, ready to choose a mission, over and over again. Dong-gu stood there looking at the booth. He didn't know what to answer. He kept yelling at the booth. He asked to be told the whole truth because he wanted to know what happened to his parents. He asked to see the list of tasks. He looked at the task list that came out in front of him again. Having read the list better, he didn't think he would be able to complete these tasks. Dong-gu hesitantly asked at the booth if he could choose an assignment later. Booth said that if he wants to pick an assignment later, he needs to come back to reality. He needs to use the system inside his mind. Dong-gu grabbed his head with both hands. His head was just splitting. He was in terrible pain. Suddenly, the guy opened his eyes. His eyes were scared, and he was breathing heavily. He found himself in the very same submarine from which he had disappeared. Michelle yelled at him to catch Jerry, for at the moment he was flying at him. Jerry was very scared. He flew straight at Dong-gu. The guy turned around and looked in Jerry's direction. He didn't expect this. Jerry banged his elbow on the edge of Dong-gu's chair. The guy looked at Jerry and was horrified. He realized he had to do something. Jerry was falling from side to side. Dong-gu was serious. He shouted something to the guy, but he didn't hear. Suddenly, Dong-gu extended his hand towards Jerry. His hand lit up with the same fire, and his eyes turned a bright red color. The guy hoping to catch Jerry, he bared his teeth. The guy caught Jerry by the collar, his hands still burning with that flame. He caught hold of the collar and started pulling him towards him. He abruptly picked up the guy and with one hand flipped him over and pulled him toward him. He quickly grabbed hold of the boy and pulled him to him. He took him with both hands and pulled Jerry very tightly against him. The submarine captain shouted to everyone to be careful and hold on to something. Michelle looked sharply out the window. She saw something terrifying in the window and told everyone to look. Dong-gu, with Jerry in his arms, abruptly turned his head to see what was happening at the window. The guy was still in shock at everything that was happening. He was shocked by what he saw. His eyes opened wide. Through the window, he saw that all the fish had sharply red eyes because of the lava that was coming from the obelisk. He thought to himself that the fish had gone mad. Derek grabbed his head and started to panic. He didn't want to die, and he thought it was going to be different. He wasn't ready for all of this. Suddenly, the submarine managed to get out of this water vortex. Now this great shaking was gone. The vessel was in a calm state. The captain breathed a sigh of relief, wiping the sweat from his face. He said they'd gotten out of the vortex. Jerry thanked Dong-gu very much. He kept his hand to his chest and said the guy has a great grip. Suddenly, Jerry got off the chair and a lot of blood was flowing from his arm. Most likely he had hurt himself when he was flying from side to side with the ship still in the vortex. Dong-gu looked at Jerry's hand with his bright red eyes and was shocked. He didn't know what to do. Bright red blood was flowing from his arm. It was dripping directly onto the floor. Jerry was sitting on the floor, squirming in pain. Dong-gu crawled over to him to see what was wrong. Michelle unbuckled her belt and ran to Jerry while Derek was in shock, clutching his head. Jerry sat up and made a face in pain. Derek and Michelle watched while Dong-gu asked the guy if he was hurting anything else, if he felt dizzy. Jerry told him that nothing but his arm hurt. He looked at Dong-gu in a panic and answered his questions. The captain of the submarine ran up to the boys and suggested that they wait until they got to the surface. Just there, Jerry would be helped by men and first aid. But Dong-gu refused because he was a student at the Oriental Medical School. He told him to bring a first aid kit so that he could give first aid to the injured. The captain reacted quickly and said he'd bring it over. Dong-gu looked at Jerry and put his hands to his head. He tried to calm him down somehow, saying that he was no longer threatened by anything but his hand. But suddenly, Dong-gu remembered that it was a stand-up assignment to administer emergency first aid to a patient during the day. Dong-gu closed his eyes and transported to the space where this booth was located. The booth already had this task on display. Donggu quickly realized that the task was already waiting for him. Without a second thought, he pressed accept. He quickly regained consciousness just as the captain brought in the first aid kit. Jerry was still panicking. He looked at the guy and said he was starting to get dizzy. Donggu sharply shouted to him not to faint in any way. He had to quickly tell him something. The most important thing was that he did not faint. Jerry started to panic to tell about himself. He was a little scared because Donggu shouted it sharply, and there was no way he was expecting it. The guy praised him. He told him to keep going and not to stop. He told him to slowly raise his hand and give it to him. At the same time, Jerry continued to talk about himself. All three men looked at Jerry's hand in horror. You could see the fear for the boy and the panic in their faces. Jerry saw his friends looking at his hand in consternation. He looked at his hand in shock and asked, "Is it that bad?" Donggu shouted at him not to look at his hand and continued on to say something further. Donggu lowered his gaze down and saw a horrifying picture. He had a huge open fracture from which blood was continuously pouring out. Donggu began to look at this fracture and thought about how he would only be able to give first aid. The guy told Jerry that he had an open fracture and would need to stop the bleeding. He said it would hurt a little and he'd have to be patient. Jerry was in a panic, but he followed all the guy's instructions because he realized he was a doctor and would be able to help him. The boy quickly opens the first aid kit, his hands beginning to burn with the very flames. The young man is serious. He puts a belt around Jerry's arm to stop the blood flowing. Donggu skillfully quickly bandages the guy's arm. The bandages are already stained with blood. His hands are still burning with flames. He carefully breaks the first aid kit into 2 pieces to secure them around his arm. He places the 2 parts of the first aid kit around his arm, continues to bandage his arm, and the first aid kit parts with bandages. When he finished, he wiped his face with sweat because it was a painstaking job. Michelle and Derek were shocked that he had done it so quickly. Donggu reflected that his ability was really amazing. The guy finishes helping and explains to them to loosen the belt for 2 minutes every 40 minutes to allow blood to flow into the arm. A startled Jerry looks at Donggu and thanks him. Everyone was around Jerry. Angry, Michelle asked him why he didn't secure his arm straight, why he left it in a bent position. He looked at her and coldly said that an open fracture could easily lead to the same injury and to avoid that you should keep your arm in a bent position. Michelle looked at the guy resentfully while Jerry squirmed in pain. Suddenly, grabbing his head, he remembered his phone. He shouted loudly and asked where his phone was. Donggu took a step forward and everyone heard a cracking sound. It was most likely a cell phone. Yes, indeed. He stepped on Jerry's cell phone. He bent down to pick up the phone and said he was here. He stood up and had his phone in his hand. He didn't have time to say a word before Michelle suddenly ran up to him and took the phone. Michelle called the guy blind and reprimanded him. She asked why he wasn't looking under his feet. She tried to turn on her phone, but it was broken. Donggu got angry and called her a rude little girl. Jerry was in shock. He couldn't believe his phone was smashed. He says the old man almost gave his life for those pictures. Jerry came up to the guy and said he didn't have time to look at the pictures. It was obvious he was very upset and worried. Donggu feels guilty about it because he was the one who stepped on his phone. He looks away because he is embarrassed and says, "That's how it is." The submarine slowly rises to the top. There are still fish and bubbles floating around. Donggu looks at this sea view while behind him Jerry's arm hurts terribly, squirming in pain. Michelle standing next to him, helping him in case. Derek is behind him, looking out the window. Abruptly, he yells for everyone to look out the window upstairs. You could tell from his face that he was agitated. Derek looked out the window. He noticed that their submarine was almost topside. He yelled for everyone to look up. The submarine was slowly making its way up. There were fish swimming around and it was calm. 15 minutes later, they rose to the surface. It was still as clear as ever. Big, thick clouds floated across the sky. A helicopter came to pick up Jerry and take him to the surgery. The doctor got out of the helicopter and shook Donggu's hand. He said the guy did a good job. He gave Jerry first aid in time. He said that they would now take him to the Maldives to have surgery on his arm. Derek was excited. He thanked Donggu very much and said that they should meet sometime when they were in China. Derek was excited. He thanked Donggu very much and said that they should meet sometime when they were in China. Jerry smiled naively and told Donggu that they would text him when they were in China. Donggu smiled sweetly and showed a gesture of goodbye. He was glad that he was able to help a person in such a situation. The helicopter began to gain momentum. Derek climbed in first and offered his hand to Michelle, with Jerry standing behind him. Donggu nonchalantly turned around and went to his room. Michelle took one last look at Donggu and smiled sweetly at the guy. She was still grateful to him for saving her friend's life. When Donggu was walking to his room, he suddenly stopped and heard a sound. It was the mid-level assignment. It had been completed. Donggu had something abruptly appear in his shirt pocket. He looked in his pocket. Something had indeed appeared in his pocket. It was the promised pills that would prolong Donggu's life for 5 days. A little time had passed. It was nearing 12 o'clock at night. The boy lay on his bed and looked at those strange pills. He lay looking at them and pondered whether these pills could really prolong his life. He turned the tablets backwards. There was a black fish on a purple background, and at the bottom there was a text in some incomprehensible language. The young man searched all over the internet, but he could not find or understand the meaning of these inscriptions. Suddenly, while Donggu was looking at these pills, he felt a sharp pain. He was transported to that booth. There were new tasks for normal, difficult, and insane levels. Donggu familiarized himself with all the levels and decided to do the normal level. Since he wouldn't have time to do the crazy and complicated one, he took on the normal one. He needed to find a needle and a rubber tourniquet. He took his phone and called the hospital. He asked them to deliver the things he needed. 2 hours later, he finished making the 1,000th rubber tourniquet. He pierced these tourniquets with needles. He held a rubber tourniquet in his hand and poked it many times with a needle. His hands were already trained and burning with that flame. Soon he finished doing the normal level task. He received a notification that his level of cold-blooded mastery had been upgraded. Suddenly, something appeared in his pants pocket. Donggu reached into the pocket and fumbled for the pills. Then he received a message saying that the pills were his reward for completing this mission. He pulled out a packet and looked at it closely. It was the same as the previous one. He picked it up and wanted to get one pill out. He pushed on it. It was almost out. But then he came to his senses. He decided that it wasn't time yet and that he shouldn't open that packet. He clutched the pill packet in his hand and thought about how it was too risky to take and drink these mysterious pills. A huge monster with the face of a kraken stood looking at a bunch of people. He was holding the very pills in his hand, and they were burning with that red fire. In front of him stood a completely naked Donggu, and the people below were crowding around. Donggu stood outside and held his cell phone in his hand. He was a little worried. He dialed the person's number and started calling. Donggu called his old friend Tsai. He said he needed help with a case. 3 days later, Donggu arrived in Dongzhou, China. The weather was clear, with clouds floating in the sky. Donggu was stylishly dressed as he passed by people. They began to whisper to each other as they looked at him. While Donggu was proudly walking down the city street, someone shouted his name loudly and clearly from behind. The boy turned around to see who it was. A panting boy his age ran up to him. He greeted him, told him welcome back, and the young man turned to see his old friend. He greeted him too. Donggu looked at his friend with a cute smile on his face and clarified if he had done what he had asked. His friend, adjusting his glasses, lowered his gaze to the floor and hesitantly said that he had done everything. But there was one thing. You could see from the guy that he was tense about something. The young man put his hand on his friend's shoulder. He asked him why he was so tense and what was wrong. He should take it easy. The guy very loudly and firmly shouted while looking at Donggu at the same time. He asked him if he was just going to end his life like that. Donggu and his longtime friend went to some building that resembled a med university. They went into the third office. Old Donggu told him that during his absence, there were a lot of rumors about him. They stood by the door and talked about it. He continued to say that Donggu had spent all his money on gambling, went bankrupt, and committed suicide. He went on to say that he had no idea what Donggu was doing if not trying to commit suicide. Donggu interrupted him and asked him if he could think a little more positively since they were medical students. The door opened and they walked into Tsai's office. He still didn't understand why the guy needed his help 3 months after his disappearance. Donggu looked at him with a smile, but he was a little worried. He started to talk about how he had met a doctor who had given him unusual medicine, but he didn't think Tsai would believe him. Tsai opened his little refrigerator and asked him what floated by if he wanted to come back for a retake, and all the people were shocked at the news, but Dong-gu told him that he had reread Higashino Keigo. Tsai opened the refrigerator and pointed his finger at the vials. He said they were brainstem malignant tumor cells. He had already managed to grow them into a suspension. The guy approached Tsai and said that it was pretty good. He was surprised because he had created it too quickly. He didn't know where he had managed to acquire it while he had been gone for 3 months. The guy nervously adjusts his glasses. He was a little excited. He told about the Pioneer Cup. He didn't relax during the vacation. Dong-gu waved his finger at his head and asked if Tsai was talking about the national competition among medical students. And now he realized why he had turned gray early. Tsai removed his hand and corrected his glasses. He was angry and said that if he hadn't given importance to the cup, he wouldn't have been able to create those cells so quickly. Dong-gu looked at Tsai in surprise and asked if this competition had anything to do with malignant tumors. If so, then would Tsai want to take him along? Kai nervously looked at Dong-gu and asked if he really wanted to go. Dong-gu stood puzzled. After all, Tsai allowed Dong-gu to go with him. They went to the 24th office, but they were a little late because Tsai was making such an important decision to take him with them, or not. They went into the office and asked to be excused for being late. Tsai walked into the office first. He took his eyes downward as usual and was a little scared, but Duty stood with his back straightened proudly and looked forward. There were a lot of people in the room. They were lab technicians. They all started whispering about Dong-gu. They thought he was dead. Some thought he was bankrupt, and some thought he had more money and was not interested in studying. Dong-gu was a little unsure as he said hello to the other guys and the head man, sweat dripping from his face. The head woman was a very pretty girl with brown hair and a brown bob. She averted her gaze. She didn't want to look at Dong-gu, just said, "Oh." The head man began to explain to the other guys in the club that the success of their experience with abdominal dropsy and rats depended on today and that this assignment was very important. Dong-gu started to strangle Tsai because he was bullying him. He thought he knew that Dong-gu had unsuccessfully hit on the head man before, but Tsai told him that he wanted to come here. While the guys were arguing, the head man angrily told Tsai to come over here and hurry up. Dong-gu lowered himself, and the latter started to say that he had come back to study for exams and asked permission if he could study with them. The headman angrily looked at Dong-gu and told him to stay out of the way, as long as they do the work. Dong-gu looked at the girl in awe, nodded his head, and said that he understood. He was a little unsure of himself. He averted his eyes to the floor and bent his back. Tsai told him to ignore it. After all, it was all in the past. Dong-gu felt as if he was enveloped in nostalgia. He was still looking down. Sweat was dripping from his face, and he was a little tense, of course, but he agreed with Tsai and said himself that everything was already in the past. After a little while, the work started hard. The guys were running back and forth and carrying all sorts of necessary preparations and test tubes, flasks, and so on, all supervised by the headmistress. Dong-gu was looking at all this. He was trying to analyze every action of these people. He was trying to understand what they were doing and what was in each of these tubes that didn't carry. Suddenly, one of the guys yelled to the head man that the 4th rat had a bloated belly like a frog and they could collect the abdominal fluid. All the guys ran to this rat. They watched it with interest. Tsai said that this time they could count on a successful material. There is a white rat on the table. Indeed, its belly is very swollen, and the head man was pressing tweezers on its belly to see if it was in pain. The headmistress said they needed to collect the cell fluid right away because the tumors were starting to grow. She put gloves on her hands and looked at that rat. Dong-gu walked up to Tsai and asked what questions about the tumor they were investigating. Tsai looked at Dong-gu with a perplexed look. Immediately, he answered that the research topic was photodynamic therapy for tumors. Dong-gu stood there listening to what Tsai was saying. Tsai began to tell the guy that imported photoinitiator is too expensive, and to save money, their head man suggested to grow their own cages for experiments. They decided to take rats. Dong-gu looked at Kai and asked him in a whisper how the research topic could help him with the growth of his tumor cells. Dong-gu continued to stare at Tsai. Tsai had already prepared to reply. He didn't have time to say a few words before he was interrupted by the head man. She turned and replied loudly and angrily that if they wanted to chat, they should go out. and if they were watching, they should be quiet. Tsai covered his mouth with his hand, and Donggu said it was his fault and apologized a lot. It was obvious that the guys were a little scared. The head woman put on her gloves and began stabbing the syringe into the rat's abdomen. The rat was lying with its paws spread apart, and some blue, incomprehensible liquid was being poured into its belly. Suddenly, Donggu had a sharp headache, the kind of pain he had when he first saw that big Kraken man who soon gave him assignments. Donggu sharply shouted and held his hands on his head and started shouting, "Ah!" Tsai turned around sharply. I did not understand what was going on. Donghu looked forward. He saw that his eyes started to become cloudy and red. He didn't understand what was happening to his body. The whole world began to swim. Everything became red, and the sides began to eat up some red, incomprehensible stains. The headman and the other girl turned around to see what was happening, while Tsai did not understand what happened to Donggu. He opened his bright red eyes and was horrified. He saw something terrible. He wasn't in that lab. He was somewhere else. He sat in a red and black room. There were rotting corpses lying around. It was like a horror room. There was a text in front of him in some incomprehensible language. Donggu began to look around the room. On the table, he saw spilled vials with blood in them. He didn't understand what was going on. He saw broken mirrors. There was blood and dirt everywhere. It was a horrible sight. Donggu was very afraid. He noticed a body that looked like a human body. It was all blue and had no skin. Ribs and muscles were visible. He wondered to himself where it could be. He saw writing on the wall in this incomprehensible language. He shouted loudly and began to say that these bloody writings were like the language he had seen on the tablets. Suddenly, something happened to Donggu. He was petrified and stared intently at the inscriptions. Donggu began to read the text, even though he didn't know the language. Something was reading the text instead of him. It said that the fruit of darkness was growing in the abyss, and a huge worm would soon appear in the world. Donggu sat and looked up. His eyes were glowing red, and his voice was very strange. Suddenly, after reading this text, he woke up, and he himself did not realize what had happened. Suddenly, the writing began to flow. Now Donggu couldn't make out anything. It was just a huge red bloodstain on the wall. Suddenly, a huge number of nasty worms crawl out of that bloodstain. Suddenly, Donggu felt nauseous. His stomach began to ache, and he felt terribly sick at the sight. Suddenly, a rotting corpse of a creature, it could hardly be called a human, starts crawling towards Donggu very quickly. He wanted to bite Donggu with his sharp teeth. He roared like a wolf. It was disgusting. Donggu looked at the creature with disgust. He gritted his teeth. He was disgusted by this creature. Suddenly, the creature pounced on him. It wanted to bite Donggu. He tried to cover himself with his hands and closed his eyes. Donggu woke up. It was just a hallucination, and this nasty creature was Tsai. The guy was very scared since he had just had a horrible hallucination. Kai tried to calm Donggu down as he tossed from side to side. He couldn't find his place. He was still reeling from those hallucinations. He started bragging for everything. Everything started falling. Kai picked up Donggu because he was afraid he would hurt himself. Tsai gently and slowly set the boy down in the chair. He calmed him down, telling him that everything was fine. Donggu was coming to his senses a little. He opened his eyes and saw the guys in front of him. They stood looking at him, ready to give him first aid if he needed it. Tsai was the most worried about him, of course. Donggu started to touch his head, ashamed of himself for making such a mess. He wondered if it was a hallucination, but he told everyone that he was fine and not to worry about him. The guys came up to him. The headman began to question him. Tsai tried to help him and asked him what was hurting him. Suddenly, a man walked into the office. Loud and clear, he told Donggu to get out of here if he was okay. All the boys looked towards the man. It was their teacher and Professor Gu. They didn't expect to see him here and now. There was a big man with glasses standing by the door. He was older, and he asked the boy why he had come here. The guy looked at him. He was embarrassed. He looked away. The guy said he was here to study for the exam. The teacher walked around the room. He looked at all the students. The teacher told him that their studies would not help him in the exam in any way. Donggu, not wanting to talk to this teacher any further, decided to just leave. The teacher turned around to look at him one last time. The teacher said that Donggu seemed to him to be a very gifted and intelligent student. He appreciated him very much and got along well with him before. The teacher further talked about him. He said that his hopes were false. Dong-gu was actually a fool. He said that these guys would be much smarter than Dong-gu. The boy, not wanting to listen to all that this man was saying, ran out of the office. He was very offended to hear such a thing from the teacher. The teacher came to give the boys the news. He learned that the health department was interested in their work, projects, and experiments. He stood and told his students that they must not disgrace themselves. He thought these students were very intelligent and responsible, so he believed in their abilities. Tsai was sitting at his computer when the head teacher came up to him. She didn't fully understand what had happened to Dong-gu, so she decided to ask him. But Tsai said he didn't know what had happened and would find out when he returned to the dormitory. The headman looked at Tsai and assigned him a job. She told him to see to Dong-gu's well-being. He shouldn't have overexerted himself after this incident. The head teacher left, and after that, another girl came up to Kai. She began to ask her old friend Dong-gu about his relationship with Teacher Gu, for she was very curious about what had happened between them. Tsai began to tell her that before, Teacher Gu and Dong-gu used to get along very well. They talked a lot, and the teacher always praised the boy, saying that he was a very smart and educated person. But then everything changed. When Dong-gu failed the exam, he was almost expelled from the university. Then their relationship sharply deteriorated and became worse. Tsai went on to say that Dong-gu respects Teacher Gu and has no hard feelings towards him or anything, but his speech is suddenly interrupted by the teacher himself. He puts his hand on the boy's shoulder. He looks at him and tells him not to get distracted and to do his job properly, because a lot depends on it. Tsai smiled nervously and said that he understood, but that he was a little scared. At 2 o'clock in the morning, there was a noise coming from room number 3, although there shouldn't have been. It was night, and the university had already closed. There was Dong-gu sitting at the desk in a medical gown. He was doing something at the desk, and there were a lot of test tubes and medical supplies beside him. He carefully took the syringe in his hand and began to prick the rat. His hand was already trained in this business, for he had pierced 1,000 rubber harnesses with needles, so it was very easy for him. After he injected some drug into the rat, he released it back into the cage with the other rats. Dong-gu looked at the cage of rats. He only had to wait for the 2 groups of rats to form tumors. Then his experiment would come to an end. It was already morning, but Dong-gu was still sitting in that office. The university had started its work. Tsai, opening the door with his key, walked into the office, asking Dong-gu if he had returned. When he walked in, he noticed that Dong-gu was sleeping on a table around a lot of books. Tsai walked over to the boy and took one of his notebooks. He started reading and realized that the boy was really trying hard to pass the exam. He closed his notebook and looked at the boy. He was still sleeping soundly, and Tsai mumbled to himself almost silently and said that he hoped Dong-gu would pass the exams and everything would be fine. Tsai recalls how 2 years ago he was sitting in a classroom. It was already evening, and there were 2 guys standing next to him. They insulted him in every possible way. One of them told him to go back to the village and that there was no place for a talentless guy like Tsai. Tsai sat and listened to everything he was told. The guy behind him also began to say that studying medicine required talent, which the young man didn't have. Tsai listened to all this and was angry. He was already tired of it all. They kept pushing the guy and calling him a bottom. They told him not to rely on Old Man Gu's good character. One of these guys pointed to the guy's hair. He called him creepy. He was pointing to his hair and saying it looked terrible at such a young age. The guy stood in the auditorium continuing to laugh at him. He looked at his watch and resented where Gu goes. He called him a major and asked him what he was wearing. At that time, Dong-gu walked into the auditorium and saw all this. Dong-gu ran up to Tsai and grabbed him by the shoulders. Calling him brother, he suggested that he go out for a drink. The guys were excited when they saw Dong-gu enter the auditorium because they were supposed to go party soon. Dong-gu took Tsai and started to leave. He angrily told those guys to look for another person to pay for them because he wasn't going to. The guys stood in shock and stopped smiling. They looked at Dong-gu and were silent. Dong-gu was a little confused and started scratching his head. He smiled and sweat dripped from his face. He apologized and said that he had never been to the dormitory since he entered the university. Tsai fixed his glasses and started to walk away from Donggu. He believed the guy could handle it. He hoped he would definitely get in. Donggu was sitting in his office. It was already dark, and he was doing his usual experiment with the rat. He picked up one of the rats. A tumor could be seen at the bottom of its abdomen. Donggu started to touch it with his finger while the rat was in pain. Donggu looked at the rats and smiled because he could start his experiment. The two groups of rats all had tumors. The boy looked at the table. There were 5 packs of these secret pills on the table, which he had gotten when he did the missions. He said that he had completed 3 normal-level assignments in the last week, so now he had 5 packs. He took one packet and squeezed out one black and purple pill. He began to remember the descriptions of these pills. He remembered that one pill spells life for 1 day. He opened the capsule of this pill. He started to pour some beige, crumbly powder onto the napkin that was on the scale. Donggu needed to consider the weight of the rat because a large portion of this pill could kill it. He calculated everything. He realized that 1 pill would be enough for 3 rats for a week. He poured the powder into a test tube and thought about it. He poured the contents of the pill into a syringe, and through the syringe, with careful and slow movements, he began to feed the rats. Everything was ready. There were 5 rats in total. He divided them into 2 groups, Group A and Group B. Group A were 3 rats with tumors that received a dose of this pill. Group B were 2 rats with tumors, but they did not receive a dose of these pills. Donggu held the package of these pills in his hand and stared at it intently. He thought that if they were really working pills, then they were a gift from the devil, and he was willing to sell his soul for these pills. The guy started keeping his diary, where he wrote down everything related to this experiment. He recorded everything he observed about these rats. It was the 2nd day of the experiment. So far, there was no change in the rats' behavior. It was the 4th day of the experiment. Donggu continued to give the pills to one group of rats. He began to record his observations in his notebook. He also noticed that the rats in Group A were feeling just as well. Donggu noticed that on the 7th day of the experiment, the rats in Group B began to feel very bad. Because of the pain, their activity decreased and they began to move less. But the rats in Group A didn't grow tumors, and the activity remained the same. They felt the same as on the 1st day of the experiment. Donggu took out a jar of pills. In the jar were those mysterious pills. He said that he had to find the right time and place to take them. Donggu opened his notebook. He wanted to write down his observations. He hesitated and presented his hand to his chin. He figured out what to write, in case he failed. And if something went wrong when he took those pills, he had a will written in his notebook on the very last page. It was already morning. Donggu went to the hospital of the Eastern Medical University. It was a huge building resembling an institute, but much bigger. Donggu was sitting in the waiting room. There was a lot of noise around. Nurses were shouting from somewhere, saying that they had new patients, or that someone needed to do cardiac resuscitation. Someone was shouting for someone to calm down. Some children were crying and telling their parents that they were in pain, and someone was saying that the patient should be sent to the 3rd ward. Donggu was sitting on a chair waiting for something. A gurney with a bloody man on it passed by him. Donggu looked at the sight and was horrified. He pulled out his pill jar and nervously began to open the lid. When he opened, one pill fell out into the palm of his hand. The black and purple pill did not bring any positive emotions to the guy because he was afraid to take it. But today was the day he decided to take it. He quickly put it in his mouth and swallowed it. Of course, he was very afraid, for he was afraid of death. As he swallowed the pill, he lovingly and so tenderly said the words Mommy and Daddy. He missed them, and maybe after a while, after taking this plate, he would be with them. It was evening. Tsai was about to return from his studies. He knocked on the door and asked if Donggu was there because he needed help. Tsai walked into the room, concurrently complaining that when he has his hands full of things, Donggu is never in the room. The weather was clear. There was absolutely no one in the room. Tsai wondered where his friend might have gone. Suddenly, a guy's voice came from behind him. He asked Tsai if there was anything to eat in the dormitory, since he hadn't eaten since morning and was starving. Kai fell down in fear. He turned around and saw a tired Donggu in front of him. He started yelling at the guy and asked why he was sneaking up on people like that and scaring them. He scared him to death. Dong-gu made himself some noodles. It looked very appetizing. While he was eating, the guy asked his friend where he got that liver because it was very tough, and that pig probably had cirrhosis of the liver. Dong-gu looked at the guy with a strange look. He squinted his eyes and said that the guy was really thrifty. While the guy was eating his noodles, his friend remembered what he wanted to say. He told him that he had received an overseas parcel, and it had been at the post office for several days. Dong-gu extended his hand towards Tsai and asked about the parcel. He was surprised because he wasn't expecting any parcels, much less overseas parcels. He took it in his hands and started looking at this parcel. He looked at it and thought to himself that this parcel was foreign. He looked at the receipt and saw that it had been sent from the Maldives. It was probably the boys. The boy held the package in his hands and thought of those guys. He remembered how the doctor had said he would take Jerry to the Maldives to have the operation. The young man took a stationery knife and began to carefully open the package. He thought about his friends and remembered that he had been unable to get in touch with Jerry for a long time, but had never heard back from him. He also started thinking about his broken cell phone, which had a recording on it. When he opened the parcel, there was a large amount of paper on top, so there was something fragile and valuable in the box. He thought about the anomaly that happened in that ocean. He still couldn't let go of the thought that it might be related to his parents. He began to put the paper away with quick movements. Reflecting on the conversation of those people, he realized that this conversation had confirmed everything. When he removed the paper, he was shocked. He saw something in the box that he didn't expect to see at all. In the box was Jerry's broken cell phone. It was just as orange as it had been then. Dong-gu picked up the phone in his hands. He started to twist and examine it, but it wasn't working yet. He pressed the power button many times, but the phone never turned on. The screen was cracked and did not work. The guy didn't understand why they sent that phone to him. Maybe they lost it, and the person who found it couldn't get it back. But it was very strange because Dong-gu was still almost a stranger to them. He was looking at this phone. He didn't understand why they sent this phone to him. He wants to try to fix this phone to see the contents. Don asked Tsai if he had a small screwdriver because he needed to take the phone apart to fix it. Tsai, adjusting his glasses, said that he didn't have a screwdriver, but suggested that he go to the nearest metalware store, which was just near the institute. Dong-gu came out of the metal products store. He had a bag in his hand. He bought something from there. Dong-gu looked at his phone frequent problems when repairing his phone. Dong-gu read this article. Suddenly, he felt someone's eyes on him. He quickly raised his head and became alarmed. He didn't understand where he was being followed from. He turned around and saw that someone was following him, and it was very unpleasant. He turned around sharply and saw a man standing behind him near his car smoking a cigarette. The man noticed Dong-gu turned around abruptly. The man didn't realize what to do and just stood there looking at the guy. A man smoking near the car turned away, not wanting to look at the guy. Dong-gu looked at him in bewilderment. Sweat dripped from his face and his smile disappeared. He thought that he had just made a mistake, although this man seemed very familiar to him. Dong-gu came home in the late afternoon. It was 9 o'clock in the evening, so he bought everything he needed and started to take the phone apart. The guy, very tired already when he took the phone apart, he started to turn it on. He said that he did everything he could and all hope now is only in God. The guy pressed the power button. He held it for a long time and the phone finally turned on. He was very happy and thought it was a success. After the phone was turned on, he saw that it had a password. The guy was very upset because he had spent a lot of time to turn on the phone. But he remembered the sender's number. For some reason, he thought it was the password. It was worth a try. It might have been the password, but it had just been classified in some way. Dong-gu picked up his phone and started to enter that password. It was his last hope to watch that very video. Yes, indeed, this number turned out to be the right password and the guy's joy was unbounded. Now he could safely watch the video he had wanted to see for so long. With a quick swipe of his hand, he clicked on the home screen. He saw an app called Gallery and clicked on it. Dong-gu started looking for that video. It had to be at the very end. He quickly flipped through a gallery with many different pictures. At the end, he finally found that video. He was very happy. Now he can watch it in peace. He held the phone in his hand and put on headphones to hear every word. Jerry's voice came out of the phone, telling his viewers to subscribe to the channel. The video shows Jerry in that very same submarine. He was filming himself and the view from the window, talking about how they were already at the very bottom. Dong-gu watched the video carefully, listening to every detail, and suddenly he heard the captain's voice shouting for everyone to fasten their seatbelts because they were caught in the vortex. He immediately recognized that voice, because that's when the weirdness started. The guy managed to see the view from the window he had wanted to see for so long. On the half-broken screen was a picture of the view. There he noticed a very large part of the wreck. It was completely covered with seaweed, and there were fish swimming near it. Dong-gu tensed up dramatically. He had seen what he wasn't supposed to see, and now he realized how his parents had disappeared and what had become of them. Dong-gu looked at the video in shock. He realized that it was the ship his parents had used for the expedition. He couldn't believe it. He didn't know what to do or how to react because it seemed impossible to him. He memorized the sight of that ship for the rest of his life. He remembered the way it looked, every detail of it. Dong-gu couldn't believe his eyes when the image of the shipwreck that had taken his parents away appeared on the phone screen. His heart was flooded with excitement and pain as memories of the tragic past came back to his mind. He paused the video, taking in every detail of the ship as if immersed in his family's history. Rust and the greenish hues of algae turned the majestic liner into an underwater realm of time. Every lost detail was a reminder of the turbulent waters that had separated him from his parents. The whispering waves and sea noise sounded from Dong-gu's headphones, as if urging him to delve deeper into the past. His eyes reflected a mixture of despair and disbelief as each frame of the video revealed the mysteries of the deep sea. But in his soul, there was hope for a miracle, that this horrifying picture was just an illusion and his parents might still be alive somewhere. In his memories, Dong-gu opens the dusty pages of his childhood memory, where every moment with his parents is filled with vivid colors. That day, the seabird delighted their family with its majesty, and his mom hugged him as if wanting to convey some of her love for the sea. Dad, in turn, would speed down the promenade, filling the air with laughter as if it were a moment of happiness that was meant to last forever. Now, however, these memories torment him like a storm in his soul, and the seabird has become a symbol of lost happiness. Dong-gu's ears hummed with the sound of the waves like a ghostly chorus, and his gaze slid across the screen where the wreck seemed to come alive under the water. Incredible forces of nature, like the magic of the ocean, kept it moving, as if a soul was awakening in each of its metal frames. The ancient mysteries of the seabed unraveled before Don's eyes, leaving him in utter amazement at what seemed impossible. The wreck danced once again underwater, under the power of the invisible threads of ocean magic. With astonishment in his eyes and his mouth open, Dong-gu noticed something mysterious on the video. Where the dark waters surrounded the ship, he could make out dimly glowing lights, like glowing eyes underwater. The flickering reflections created an atmosphere of mystery around the wreck. At that moment, time stood still, and his imagination soared into a world of maritime fantasy, where reality and magic intertwined in a dance of sea miracles. The frozen frame of the video revealed a scene that made Dong-gu freeze. There, clutching his head, he was the embodiment of his own nightmare. His eyes reflected horror, as if black waves of misfortune had overwhelmed his consciousness. He realized that the point he was staring at carried the secrets of the system that offered him the mysterious pills. In that instant, past and present began to intertwine, revealing to him the sinister secrets of their meeting. In the world of chaos and screams on the video screen, Dong-gu began to whisper something incomprehensible in horror, as if trying to convey an ominous premonition to himself. However, his words were drowned in a sea of sounds, screams, moans, and tossing from side to side. It was a slow dance of silent terror, where his whisper was lost in the swirl of sounds created by the storm of emotion and fear. In this mad world of auditory chaos, his whisper seemed to be the last fading light of reason that was drowned in the noise of raging panic. With a look of terror in his eyes, the boy could not take his eyes off the screen, where the whirlwind of events made his heart beat faster. Amid the shouts and sounds of the submarine came the captain's voice, shrill and commanding, like a fateful warning. "Catch Jerry!" The order that rang out left a mysterious mystery in the air. It was a call full of mystery that awakened in Dong-gu a sense of wariness and foresight, as if a warning to be on the alert in this maze of underwater nightmare. The guy's heart beat in unison with the drama unfolding on the screen, but at the peak of events, the video cut off, as if a curtain had fallen in front of the theater stage. His eyes were filled with frustrated longing, for he was left without a conclusion to this exciting story. The desire to know more, to revisit every frame in search of answers, stirred his inner world, creating an atmosphere of unresolved mystery. As if the last page of a favorite book had been torn out, the boy, gripping the time slider, rewound back to that mysterious moment when his own whispers began to echo. Impatience sparkled in his eyes, and his fingers rested on the button as if they themselves were an agitated instrument in search of lost sounds. As the sounds of whispers filled his ears again, he gazed into the screen like a magic mirror, where every word that passed was a clue to the clue he longed to know more about. In that moment, the slider became a bridge for him through the time vortex, plunging him back into the mystical atmosphere of a mysterious past. The moment the mysteries were revealed in the sounds, it was as if Dong-gu was a spectator of his own soul. With his head held up, his hands felt the pulsation of the mysterious echoes of the past, as if they themselves had become the pendulum in a vast clock of mysteries. Dong-gu's eyes were like a mirror that reflected his own terror and bewilderment. From the narrowed pupils came an indescribable darkness, like a window into the vast expanse of a dark inner world. His face became a cinematic canvas, where every blink and quivering lip was part of a mysterious script. The words torn from the depths of his being now sounded on the video. Hearing them, Don felt the curse of the ancient abyss rise up from his own soul, becoming an echo of those eerie lines that adorned the wall in the mysterious place. In that moment, he was not only an observer, but part of that mysterious foretelling symphony of fear, darkness, and mysticism. Fate had become a heavy burden for Don, and when the last whisper from the past entered his ears, it was as if he was torn inside. Taking off his headphones, he shivered at the sounds of the darkness, as if trying to rid himself of himself. With a heavy sigh, he moved away from the table, as if retreating from a portal to an unknown world. The dark shadow on his face reflected his inner struggle and despair. The phone that had witnessed the mysteries snapped from his trembling hands, falling to the table with a muffled sound. The dark corner of the room became his hiding place from unknown threats, and he clung to it as if seeking escape from the ominous melody of time. The dark night enveloped Don's room. His gaze, imbued with deep understanding, was fixed on a single point. In his mind, that moment from the video swirled in his mind, like a movie replaying in the hands of time. Second by second, each frame played out in his mind, and the words spoken in a whisper sounded like a mysterious hymn to an unknown power. He was immersed in this whirlwind of events, as if becoming a spectator and participant in his own mystery. Unsettled thoughts swirled in his mind like a flock of swift swifts. He tried to untangle the tangle of questions. Why then? Why so? And what had catalyzed these dire predictions? But the answers slipped away like smoke in the palms of his hands, and he realized that an unknown force from the past was maintaining its darkness in the depths of his mind. In that moment, he felt an incredible certainty that his words held truth. He felt that the moment in the video was not an accident, but a portal to his own fateful past. Dong-gu, like a wise alchemist, held not only the headphones, but also a part of his destiny. The gray smoke of the cigarette hovered around, creating an atmosphere of mystery and mysticism. He held his head as if trying to hold on to the elusive thoughts and forgotten memories flowing smoothly through the fingers of his reflection. His gaze reflected uncertainty, but also a determination to unlock the veil of mystery of his past. Beneath Don's hands, he could feel the ripple of time, like a whirlwind that carried him to past eras. In the back of his mind, the blurred images of that very moment from the video were taking shape, like ancient books whose pages needed a closer look. He plunged into his own words like a labyrinth of meaning, trying to see the path in this darkness of predictions. Fruit of darkness, worm, heaven and earth. The words swirled in his fuzzy thoughts like fireflies in a dark forest. Like an archaeologist, he was digging up his own past world, and each day brought to light was a mystery he had to solve. In the mosaic of Donggu's memories, a picture suddenly surfaced, like a scene from a nightmare. On the wall of this place, a text written in blood was unfolding, the same text he had spoken back then in the submarine. Those words, as if imprinted by a living heart, touched the strings of his soul again. He could feel them awakening ancient vibrations within him, linking past and present. Donggu bent over this painting. He touched the virtual traces of blood on the wall of his memories. The dark text, like a demon's seal, gave birth to agonizing questions in his soul about the origin of those mysterious words. In this maze of the past, where the walls seemed to be knocked down, he tried to find the key to understanding. Like a mosaic of the soul, this wall was only part of a larger picture in which every drop of blood, every word, were links connecting him to the mysterious system of the past. His eyes reflected his determination to solve this mystery, as dark and frightening as it was. Still captivated by the mystery of his past, Donggu gazed into the vast ocean of memories, like a navigator searching for his path in the mystical darkness. That mystery he couldn't solve, as if shimmering with the hues of ancient maps, continued to challenge him. He felt each strand of his destiny like cosmic stars, intertwining with another, creating a symphony of light. The same text he recited in the dark underwater labyrinth became a magnet attracting moments of history, creating an incredible mosaic of his own past. Donggu, like an archaeologist uncovering the hidden chambers of time, began to realize that every whisper, every cryptic word was just a piece of the puzzle. These disparate moments, seemingly unrelated to each other, turned out to be invisible threads weaving his life into a coherent whole. Donggu stepped out onto the balcony of the dormitory and immersed himself in the atmosphere of the night silence. The flame of a lit cigarette shone on his face like a torch in the hands of an explorer of unknown depths. At 2 o'clock in the morning, the world around him was plunged into a deep sleep, but dawn stood like a guardian of the evening darkness. The dark balcony was his secluded arena where he could discuss his own secrets with the night wind. Under the light of the moon, which impassively shed its light on the dark corners, Don inhaled the smoke of his cigarette, as if trying to read his future in the rings of smoke. He thought of that mysterious video as if it were a link between past and present, and every pensive look in his eyes reflected the torture of searching for answers. This balcony witnessed his inner dialogue, where the stars of the night sky became candles that illuminated the path to the clue. He stood, framed by the contours of the night city, like a guardian of his own past, burning away doubts in the fire of his cigarette and immersing himself in a world of riddles and solutions. The moon, like an ancient lamp of the night sky, cast its rays on the earth. The yellow glow of the moon was reflected in his bright red eyes. The cigarette in Don's hand smoked like a wreath surrounded by the flickering light of the night. His gaze was fixed on the vast depths of the night city, but his mind was far away amidst memories of his parents. He smoked as if each breath brought with it the scent of the past, reminding him of what had already passed into the heavens. The quiet breeze gently played with his hair, as if inhaling with the cigarette the subtle scent of nostalgia. And at that moment, like a prayer whispered against the night's gloom, his quiet "Mommy, Daddy" rang out. These were the words that fell from his lips under the moonlight, a plea to an unknown universe, becoming a bridge between past and present. In these moments, Don's soul touched the stars and communed with distant constellations as if he were part of eternity, while his memories of his parents slowly bloomed in the moonlight like flowers in a garden of memories. He stood on the dark balcony, his gaze directed forward like an arrow through the veil of time. The seriousness of his gaze reflected not only the gloom of the night, but also the deep thoughts of what lay behind the scenes of his life. His eyes, like two stars in the night sky, sparkled with a dark glow, but within them burned a fire of misunderstanding and sadness. Donggu stood on the edge between the past and the future, but at this moment, his heart was immersed in the past, in the unknown waters where the secrets about his parents floated. He realized that despite his efforts, he really did not know what his parents were doing in the world beyond his perception. This unknown, like alien stars in the night sky, distressed him, penetrating every fiber of his being. He thought about them like a mosaic, where the pieces of memories don't add up to a coherent image. And in these moments of self-discovery, he realized that perhaps knowing his parents was a journey not only within himself, but also into the unknown reaches of their own lives. Dong-gu was transported to the moment when the parting sun colored their meeting with the warm hues of sunset. Mother, as the protector of children's dreams, squatted down in front of little Dong. Her smile was as sparkling as the stars in the night sky as she held out her little finger to him. That moment was a promise of the future, like a key to the door of opportunity. Her eyes reflected the tenderness of a mother's care, and the words, "Become a doctor," sounded like a prediction, gently soaring into the heavens of his childhood dreams. Daddy, like a ship's captain in a storm, stood behind her, all decked out in expedition gear. His voice sounded like a call of adventure, and in every word he spoke, Don could smell the sea wind and fish frying over an open fire. Those words about an important meeting with the men were like a whirlwind of mystery, sprinkled with mysterious moments that remained in his soul for a lifetime. That moment became the foundation stone of his adult life, like stars drawn in the heavens, reminding him that even in the past passing light there is eternity. Under the light of a burning cigarette, Dong-gu stood, burning the past to leave only ashes in his memory. The nervous movements of his hands created a web of smoke in the air, hiding in the dense haze of the night. He stared at one point, and his eyes, like two candles in the darkness, glowed with the reflections of lost memories. In each breath of smoke, he breathed in the past, trying to understand how the ship Seabird disappeared from his life, leaving only a shadow on the sea horizon. The story of the closing of the company where his parents worked was emerging. The words of its closure sounded like the last note in the touching symphony of their working life. In the corner of his eyes flashed the moments when they stood on the deck of a ship like sailors, feeling the winds of change in their hair and dreaming of vast horizons. Don was unearthing history, lifting images of those he had lost from the ashes of the past. Burning his nerve, he hoped to discover answers in this swirl of smoke, but the truth, like a feather, remained out of reach, floating in the eternity of night. Dong-gu extinguished his cigarette, releasing a column of smoke into the night air. He told how he had spent huge sums of money to investigate the secret paths of the company, where every check and every footprint on the long journey became bricks in his own wall of mysteries. The light of the many torches lit in the search for the truth seemed to illuminate his face, but in his eyes the gleam was not a reflection of the light, but the evidence of the bitter realization of his fruitless struggle. Under the vaults of the night sky, he spoke words of failure to crack the walls of silence surrounding his parents and the mysterious company. In each sweep of his hand, like a touch of sea foam, he felt again the complexity of this sea labyrinth, where mystery lurked in the depths, out of reach like a star on the horizon. The extinguishing of the cigarette became like a sunset, plunging him into the darkness of the unknown. In the silence of the night, like an answer to his prayers, there was only the whisper of the wind which, like ancient velvet, slid through his hair like a prayer for those who remained in the gloom. Dong-gu replied that the exam was going well, but he was a little worried about the difficult questions. Tsai advised him to pay more attention to the last chapter of the textbook and added that he himself had already prepared all the necessary materials for the conference presentation. They soon reached their office, where Tsai noticed a desk stacked with books and notes. Dong-gu clarified that he had left something for Tsai on the desk related to their upcoming project. Tsai expressed his gratitude with a smile and began to study the materials provided. The headmistress, who was not there by chance, approached them with a kind greeting. She explained that she had come with new equipment for the lab, which they had long been promised. The happy news meant that they would have access to more advanced research equipment. The head girl offered to help them unload the crates, and together they made their way to the lab where the prospect of new learning opportunities awaited them. Dong-gu, with a slight tint of shyness on his face, politely offered the girl his help. His sweet smile added a note of warmth to the air, and the boys joined the girl in solving the problem. The cheerful conversation and friendly atmosphere soon made the difficult task easier, and the joint efforts made the moment memorable. Kai joined the conversation with a smile, confidently stating that he and Dong-gu could easily handle the heavy crates. The girl expressed her gratitude for the help offered, and together they set about carrying the goods. By joining forces, they made the work efficient and fast, creating an atmosphere of team spirit and mutual assistance. Kai, with a caring expression on his face, stood by, ready to support and carry out any instruction. Dong-gu, with his energy showing, continued to actively carry out the crates. The girl explained to them that it would be better to wait and help with the other crates, as these needed to be marked and placed on experimental platform number 3. Together, agreeing to the plan, they began the new task, demonstrating harmonious teamwork. Dong-gu froze and began to stare at the shelf in the study. His eyes flashed with memories of the time he had encountered hallucinations. As he recalled the moments, he realized how reality and fantasy had intertwined, creating unpredictable images. There was a shadow of nostalgia in his gaze, mixed with a determination to deal with these inner difficulties. He was looking at things in the study, and the thought arose in his mind that perhaps he had accidentally met someone that day who might have influenced his perceptions, causing hallucinations. Memories of the encounter seemed to lurk in the shadows of his memory, and he decided to recall the details of that day, hoping for some key moments that might have led to this unusual experience. The headman and Kai, anxious expressions on their faces, looked at Dong-gu, who was passionately looking at the things in the study. They didn't understand what he was doing and worriedly asked him what he was doing, hoping for clarification and an explanation for his unexpected behavior. Dong-gu continued to look at the vials, ignoring the head teacher's indignation, as if each vial held a mystery of a new game quest. He caught something mysterious in her words, as if she herself was part of an interesting plot in his real life. The headman looked at Dong-gu with bewilderment, but his shy smile and explanation about working with mice as an expert only caused her more embarrassment. But his eyes sparkled with a hint of passion, as if every fragile moment with the mouse lab was an exciting adventure for him. The headman, hearing about the boy's strange experiments, looked at him strangely, then suddenly turned to shout behind him. All gazes went towards Ruo Xian, who had come early, creating a mysterious atmosphere as if at the very beginning of a mystery plot. 3 classmates entered the study, Shu Hai, He Yu Hong, and a mysterious girl. She, standing at the center of attention, spoke, "Kai, you're early today." The gazes of everyone gathered were filled with curiosity, as if a new chapter of an uncharted adventure had opened before them. The headman and Tsai turned around to look at the new arrivals and were pleased to recognize their friends. With a smile, they said hello, and a friendly good morning was heard in return, creating an atmosphere of warm friendship in the office, as if each new day was part of their adventure together. Dong-gu stood holding the door and announced that they would all work together today. The boys looked at him in bewilderment, while the girl blushed and nodded excitedly, as if they were facing an unexpected but exciting opportunity. The work had begun. Hai Yu-hong busied himself diligently with his test tubes, and the head girl approached him, starting to ask questions and taking careful notes in her notebook, as if every detail was contributing to their mysterious research. Without wasting a moment, the head woman headed over to the busy Tsai Hai and began to ask him the same questions she had asked Hai Yu-han. There was a determination in her voice to uncover secrets, as if each answer was a clue to the puzzle they were putting together. While the head teacher was asking the boy questions, she noticed Dong-gu and Tsai having a conversation. The boy was telling Tsai about the problem, and there was a tense atmosphere in their dialogue, as if they were facing something more complicated than just a science experiment. The boy told Tsai that he had mixed up the tags of a group of mice, but assured him that he could personally correct his mistake. Tsai scratched his head and acknowledged his own confusion, thanking Gu for his help. There was a sense of relief in their dialogue, as if they had found a way out of the maze of complicated situations together. The head teacher noticed how Dong-gu suddenly went deep into his studies with a special zeal. She took note of it, sensing that there might be something deeper in his pursuit of knowledge than mere academic concern. The boys were standing talking when suddenly a stiff, old voice came from behind them, loudly ordering them to approach. Suddenly, a tense atmosphere hung in the office, as if everyone had encountered an unexpected twist in the plot of their ordinary lives. Teacher Gu stood in the aisle, looking extremely angry in his medical gown. He had a stack of papers in his hands, and his angry expression heralded an important announcement for the students, as if a sudden twist in the curriculum awaited them ahead. Teacher Gu began to shout, demanding that the students stop their work immediately and listen to him. There was seriousness in his voice, as if he was carrying important news or a warning that changed the dynamics of their learning process. The students gathered around the teacher, listening attentively to his story. The teacher announced that the country was looking for new talents, especially in the medical field, and that it was necessary to gather medical students with unique abilities. A new announcement was posted on the top floor, inviting everyone to sign up to participate, as well as competitions between medical students, as if a unique opportunity to showcase their professional skills had opened up in front of them. Donggu followed his teacher's story carefully, trying to understand why the country suddenly needed medical talent so urgently. As he thought about unknown events, he wondered what could have happened to cause such a sudden need for new medical professionals. Donggu, thinking even harder, began to speculate that all of this might have something to do with the Logkan group. The idea flashed through his mind that participating in this project could be a chance for him to enter the mysterious circle that opened the door to unexplored possibilities and mysteries. The teacher talked diligently about the contests and projects, emphasizing that one could only distinguish oneself with a strong desire. At this moment, Donggu called out his name in a calm voice, as if offering his willingness to accept the challenge and contribute to the mysterious tasks that might lie behind these contests and projects. Putting his hand on his heart, Donggu asked the teacher in a firm, determined voice if he could participate in these contests and projects, as if the question was an important and personal challenge for him. The teacher looked at the boy, smiling mockingly, and asked him sharply what kind of project he wanted to participate in, as if challenging his determination and interest. He walked over to Donggu, pointing his finger, and said that the doctor's negligence might show up in his participation. At that instant, everyone's gazes tensed, creating an atmosphere of challenge around the guy, as if his decision was the key to something much more serious. The other guys in the group couldn't help but laugh at Donggu, as if the mockery was some sort of test of his determination. However, there was a glint of determination in Donggu's eyes, and he stood firm despite the taunts, as if ready to meet the challenge. The boy met the teacher's gaze with a serious look and stated that he had undergone a change and had become more responsible. His words sounded confident, as if he was ready to prove his changes through participation in the upcoming challenges and projects. Kai tried to make a point, but the headman interrupted him, noting that Donggu had been working hard lately. Her words sounded like encouragement, as if she wanted to emphasize Donggu's hard work and dedication. The teacher turned around and glanced in the direction of the head teacher, while Donggu stood there shocked that she had spoken in his defense. The silence in the office was tense, as if everyone was waiting to see how this unexpected scene would unfold. The teacher sighed and announced that he had been instructed to choose students who were optimistic. There was an uncertainty in his words, as if the students were facing another mystery in their unusual journey. The teacher turned around and told the guy that he would give him a chance. The boy stood in shock, not expecting such a turn of events, as if it was an unexpected turning point in the course of events for him. The teacher turned to the boys and ordered them to head to the other building to prepare for the upcoming competition. His command resounded with determination and expectation from the students to actively participate in the upcoming trials. Teacher Gu turned around and told the guy that he wanted to see how he worked with the knife. His words sounded not only a test of skills but also a possible trial, creating an atmosphere of tension and anticipation. The teacher, seeing the boy's determination, nodded in satisfaction and then confirmed that he expected him to do well. The boy thanked the teacher for the opportunity to demonstrate his skills, and the room erupted with renewed interest and tension, as if everyone was ready for the next stage of the challenge. Donggu thought about the fact that the country suddenly needed medics so urgently, and his musings were filled with questions about the possible challenges that might lurk behind this unexpected need. He had to work on increasing his light-handedness level and only had 500 points left to reach the next level. This task suddenly became an important goal for him, as if each successful moment brought him closer to new opportunities and skills. Donggu opened the task tab and looked at the tasks. Suddenly, he noticed that he had only completed normal levels before, but now there were more difficult tasks in front of him, as if a challenge that would make him expand his boundaries and strive for new heights. He closed his eyes and began to ponder the possibility of learning anatomy. Images of complex body structures and systems flashed through his mind, as if every thought of future training opened up new vistas of medical science for him. He stood with his eyes closed, absorbed in thinking about the incomplete structural map, while the teacher tried to shout to him. Images flashed through his inner world, as if each element of anatomy was a key to a new understanding, ignoring the outside world and the sounds around him. He opened his eyes abruptly when the teacher shouted his name loudly. At that moment, his entire inner world blended with reality, as if his musings had been disrupted by an external challenge. The teacher started shouting at him, demanding him to open his eyes. His curiosity was evident, and he wanted to know what the guy was thinking about. The guy started to apologize and tried to come back to reality, realizing that his attention had drifted far away into his inner thoughts. The teacher adjusted his glasses and said that the four of them should go to the morgue. His words sounded mysterious, creating a sudden tension around them, as if the students were involved in some mysterious medical challenge. Donggu was the very first to agree to go to the morgue because of the unique opportunity to view a deformed body. His scientific curiosity and desire to understand the nature of the human body led him to take up the challenge, even if it meant facing the grim reality of the morgue. An hour had passed. It was raining outside, and the boys had already gone outside. The remains are stored in a warehouse, and in their perception, every raindrop became some symbol of mystery and seriousness, reminding them of fresh impressions from their visit to the morgue. All the boys in the group headed for the morgue. Standing in front of the passage, they were shocked and stared ahead, as if a mysterious and dark area full of unknown mysteries and challenges was opening up before them to be explored. Donggu's gaze darted down to the boots of one of the workers, as if something unusual or important had caught his attention in that detail, hidden amongst the general gloominess of the morgue. He looked into the truck and saw the multitude of coffins, realizing that it was a cargo transport. The grim sight of a transport for something so serious reminded him once again of the demanding tasks and challenges health workers had to overcome. The guy looked at the people and noticed that they were wearing special chemical protection clothing, as if to emphasize the seriousness and danger of the environment in which they were working. His gaze flashed with the realization that the world of medicine included not only science, but also safety elements that dealt with the most complex and dangerous scenarios. He did not understand what was going on here, or what role these people in chemical protective clothing were playing. He was puzzled by the vagueness and mystery of the process, as if he had a riddle to solve. Illuminating the dark clouds with bright light, it was as if the playful stars met the earth's storm for a moment, creating a marvelous tango of light and darkness. The rays penetrated through the darkness like magic arrows, leaving their light trail in the dusty plume of the night. At this moment, nature, like a great artist, was revealing its splendor, as if trying to comfort hearts eclipsed by clouds of vanity and cares. It was that moment when heaven and earth, like secret partners in the great ballet of the cosmos, merged in harmony, flirting in a night symphony. The bright light of the stars broke through the dark clouds like a magical pause in the bustle of the earth, where a moment became an eternity and light and darkness embraced in a captivating kiss. Raising questions about the origin and purpose of these white boxes, there was a mixture of wonder and curiosity in their conversation, as if they were trying to solve the mystery hidden inside each of them, claiming that there were mysterious statements in their school that few people knew about. He described them as keys to undiscovered mysteries disguised as mundane statements, as if the forthcoming choice of teachers posed unknown challenges. There was a tinge of uncertainty in his timid words, as if they were facing an important decision that would determine their future education. Giving the strange advice that they should look for a deformed body when choosing teachers. His words created a mysterious tension, as if these unusual instructions held the key to something profound, suggesting that the choice should be flawless, devoid of flaws, and perfectly in line with their expectations. His words sounded resolute, as if he was aiming for a high standard in choosing a teacher, excluding any possible flaws. As if to emphasize that their future learning was now in the hands of chance. His words created a sense of uncertainty, as if each choice of teacher held a meaning that could only be revealed through the process of learning. As if there was something surprising in his gaze, he pointed toward the mysterious passage in the old building and answered cryptically that something strange was going on there. His classmates exchanged glances full of curiosity and headed toward the mysterious place with him, as if they were going to explore the new mysteries that had just appeared in their school life. Their footsteps echoed muffled in the hushed echo of the steel walls. The protective suits hid their faces, but the tension in the air felt like a secret drifting away through the mysterious labyrinths of scientific research. They stood in a slender line, obeying the strict rules of an invisible battlefront. Military discipline was evident in their movements, as if every step was calibrated to the millimeter. Dong-gu realized at that moment that their mission in this gloomy space had its own military logic, to overcome the challenges of the future. In their diligence and dedication to their mission, Dong-gu saw the potential to develop and improve medical practices. For him, this was not just a look at the professionals, but a look into the future. Trying to catch the smallest details of character and determine what medical talents this man might have had. He watched the man as he passed, as if reading his life experience in the medical field with every step. As if every line on his face bore the weight of medical challenges. The dark eyes reflected not only physical fatigue, but also the mental dryness of encountering illness and suffering. Dong-gu felt that the man in front of him was not just a medical professional, but a man who carried the burden of human pain and difficulty on his shoulders. The boy's heart slowed under the pressure of that terrible gaze, as if he felt the weight of all the pain and fatigue that lurked in those lips. At that moment, Dong-gu realized that his own thoughts and feelings had become part of that invisible connection. As if sensing the urgency of the mission on their shoulders, his touch sounded not only demanding but also caring, aimed at the common cause. The words "hurry up" sounded like an order to accomplish an important task. And in his gaze he could see not only seriousness, but also a deep respect for their hard work. He realized that these men were carrying a heavy burden of human loss and suffering as they transported corpses. In the silence of the moment, his thoughts of respect filled that gloomy corridor, dedicated to their mission. The guy's footsteps sounded like the rhythm of hard work, and Dong-gu, following behind, could smell not only the fragrance of chemicals in the air, but also the atmosphere of focused responsibility. His gaze realized the importance of each link in this coherent chain. And at that moment, Teacher Kui's gaze changed from sternness to approval. In the boy's hands glittered the official papers confirming the legality of their actions. The teacher, being a man of understanding, saw in it not only a formal authorization, but also the young students' dedication to their training, which was revealing unexplored facets of medical talents, as if he was giving free rein to the initiative of his students. His words were full of confidence in their abilities and trust in their autonomy. Teacher Kui, without taking his eyes off the phone, showed calmness and respect for the young students, as if recognizing their potential to explore and master the medical aspects. And at that moment, the cold atmosphere of the freezer seemed to envelop them in the seriousness of the task ahead. The students, finding themselves among the remains, scrutinized each of them as if on the verge of a medical discovery. Amazed at the magnitude of the challenges that lay before them, their eyes reflected not only amazement, but also determination to meet this challenge head-on. The freezer became an arena where students, filled with mixed feelings, prepared to step into the world of medical discovery and the lessons this unusual but important task would bring. Before them lay an impassable alley of white boxes, like a boundless field of challenges and responsibilities. They felt the gazes of those who were no longer among us and silently vowed to cope with the burden. In that moment, a page of life and death opened before them, where students, surrounded by corpses, prepared for a learning takeoff in which every step would be a lesson about the invaluableness of human health. As if the urgency of the moment had stamped his actions with determination. Strictly covering his face with his mask, he walked over to the drawer, concentrating in preparation for the task that lay before him. Their leadership in the medical talent team was manifested in their ability to make responsible decisions, and their general mood resembled a battlefield unity before an important medical mission. The students, mobilized by their comrades' words, began to act in sync, like a team of military surgeons on a battlefield. In every movement there was a sense of urgency, but also a common purpose, to extract knowledge and experience from these corpses to better understand the mysteries of the human body and disease. In this division of roles resounded not only discipline, but also trust in each team member. The seated students were ready for close body contact, while the standing students maintained a tense front of observation and readiness for assistance. The moment the lid opened, an anatomical book written by nature was revealed before them. The students looked at the body, which had become a teaching material, with seriousness, deep inner anxiety, and a thirst to learn more. In this brief moment, they witnessed human physiology. His emotions filled the space with dark anxiety. The boy's gaze froze, and his face expressed not only terror, but also an inner struggle with himself. Before this gaze, not only the physical mysteries of the body were revealed, but also the deep layers of emotional challenges facing future medical talents. And only the cold air and their restless breathing could be heard in the silence of the freezer. Donggu, usually calm and determined, was caught up in the excitement of facing the reality of medical research. In tense moments, it became clear that they were not only facing the bodies of the dead, but also their own fear. At this point, the box became a research arena, where formalin turned the body into a slow-motion Euro performance. The deformed hand of the corpse became a mystery that raised research questions. The boys, like detectives before an unusual case, had already begun to unravel the mystery of this box. Opening his face as if acknowledging to Kai and Donggu that they were facing an unusual medical case, the doctor looked at the corpse with deep understanding. In his voice there was not only professional confidence, but also a subtle note of recognizing the uniqueness of this body, as if it held secrets that were difficult to uncover with standard methods. At that moment, the atmosphere of a special study unfolded before them, where every aspect of the body was like a riddle, ready to tell its story. The doctor, like an archaeologist unearthing ancient artifacts, looked at the corpse with respect and the feeling that they were looking at not just a dead man, but a unique puzzle waiting to be solved. Kai glanced at Donggu, his eyes reflecting interest and thirst for understanding as he asked about Donggu's opinion on the corpse, as if opening the door to this skillful observer's perception of the world. "Do you think he's normal?" sounded the question, as if the complexity of what was happening lurked in this question. Donggu, like a wise wanderer in the labyrinth of his own thoughts, silently pondered. There was a mystery in his silence, and his refusal to answer was an act of warning, as if he knew that this corpse was only the first note in a symphony of mysteries where every chord required careful investigation. Donggu, like a shadow, moved forward, lightning fast and with determination, his movements as precise as a choreography of fear. Then, turning to Kai, he expressed a request for help with excitement in his voice, as if an echo of the urgency and importance of the events filled every word. In that moment, their union was not just an act of cooperation, but a response to the challenge that fate itself had thrown at them in this mysterious twist in the plot. Through the rows of white crates where the lifeless bodies rested, Donggu walked with unquestioning haste, his gaze gliding perceptibly over the gloomy picture created by the rows of corpses in the cold containers. The boy slowly squatted down beside one of the crates within which the corpse rested. His eyes were determined, and his hands were frozen, ready to begin the grim task of dissection, as if the question of the contents of that container held him in suspense. The guy squatted down, aiming to open the box containing the corpse. Suddenly, a piercing scream rippled through the silence as he called out to Tsai, calling for assistance in this grim moment, as if realizing that this task required a united effort. Together, they both grasped the lid of the box, like two explorers mutually exchanging a determined glance in a forward battle with a mystery. In that moment, filled with the energy of determination, slowly and with tension, as if opening a gateway to the unknown, their movements lifted the lid upward. The whisper of old hinges broke the silence, and every millimeter of the rising lid was like a step into an unknown world. Their gazes, like magnets, were drawn to the opening inner world, where hidden answers breathed in the darkness of expectation. Opening the box containing the corpse, both looked inside with a horror that gripped them from the first moments. An expression of horror flickered in Donggu's eyes, cutting off his usual impeccable composure, as if the fear of the open secret had temporarily consumed his usual composure. Tsai was uncomfortable gazing into the horrifying appearance of the corpse, his soul trembling before this sight, like a picture of a nightmare beyond death. Stammering, he expressed his bewilderment as if the words were lost in his throat, amazed that they were facing the same deformity for the second time in a row. Each moment was filled with a breath of mystery, as if the corpse's past was whispering cryptic answers that had yet to be revealed. Opening the box, they encountered another corpse, frozen in formalin, as if the seal of time had preserved it in this macabre. An amazing coincidence was soon noticed. The deformity of the left arm was exactly the same, twisted at the same strange angle as the previous corpse. It was like an interweaving of eerie parallels, revealing secrets mysteriously linked together. Tsai felt excitement, like finding the key to an ancient mysterious castle, and wonder, like opening a door to a world of secrets. In this gloomy vault he felt some unknown tension, as if each corpse was a riddle, a piece of a grand puzzle to be solved. Rushing over to the corpse, the guys began to scrutinize it, discussing every detail. One of them suddenly shouted that it was impossible to simply write it off as a coincidence, a note of excitement and anxiety in his voice. Don, imbued with determination, shouted to Tsai, expressing his desire to open another drawer. In response to this order, Tsai, agreeing, showed his willingness to unravel the mysteries anew. Opening the next box of corpses, they witnessed another strange deformation. This time, the corpse's leg was twisted, creating another point of intersection with the previous corpse, and at this point, the macabre mystery took an even more mysterious turn. The boys rushed to the corpse again to examine it closely. They were surprised to realize that the body in front of them was that of a child. One of the boys had a theory that these people, whose bodies had been affected by strange deformations, might have been victims of atomic radiation. Donggu, maintaining his characteristic calmness, directly looked at the guys and resolutely said that they should open all the boxes of corpses and look into this strange and mysterious case in detail. Upon opening the box, the boys were confronted with a new mysterious deformity. The left forearm of the corpse was twisted at a strange angle. This increased their sense of bewilderment, and Donggu, who first showed signs of concern, emphasized that each new find brought an element of difficulty to their investigation. The second box revealed another mystery. The corpse inside had a deformed right arm. One of the boys who had opened the box let out a loud shriek of excitement, as if his surprise and anxiety could not be contained in ordinary words. The third crate continued the strange pattern. The corpse inside had a deformation of the left arm, emphasizing the surprising coincidence with the previous findings. Opening the crate, the guys looked at the new deformation in silence, and the atmosphere of tension intensified. The fourth box added a new element to the puzzle. The corpse inside had a deformed right leg. The guy who had opened the box, unable to bear the sight of this amazing but terrifying sequence, felt a sudden nausea that froze his face for a moment. The fifth box continued the unbelievable sequence, the deformation of the left leg of the corpse inside. This unexpected coincidence increased the tension in the group. The guys, facing one mysterious case after another, felt the riddle of mysterious deformations becoming more and more complicated. Dong-gu, standing in front of the very mysterious discoveries, watched everything that was happening in bewilderment. His eyes reflected not only amazement, but also futility in front of this mystical puzzle. The word tianqi repeatedly turned to his thoughts as if warning him of something deeper and more mysterious than he could have imagined. Dong-gu, straining his red eyes, stared straight at the mysterious corpses, and suddenly something important popped up in his mind. As if illuminated by an inner epiphany, he recalled key information that could clear up the dark secrets hidden around these mysterious events. Dong-gu clasped his hands behind his head as if trying to hold back the inner storm of memories and gritted his teeth. At that moment, like a whirlwind of dark secrets, his face took on an expression as if he had suddenly remembered something horrible that had been hidden in the web of his memory for a long time. Dong-gu's grim memories flashed before his inner gaze like dark paintings, reawakening the very fear that had been slumbering in the depths of his mind for a long time. The images were echoes of past tragedies, and his gaze became a window to the hell in which he fought the ghosts of his own terror. In front of his face lay the rotting corpse of a man who, as if revived, was crawling in his direction. In that startling moment, images of the exact same ghastly limbs on rotting corpses that he had previously encountered in the sinister laboratory phantom were embedded in his memories. Reality and nightmares seemed to intertwine, adding even more mystery and horror to the mystery. Dong-gu squatted down, holding his head. His classmates hurriedly rushed over to him, and Sai, greeting him with concern, asked what had happened to him. Gu, with his eyes closed, was immersed in memories, feeling a déjà vu similar to what he experienced when he saw the hallucination last time. He opened his red eyes abruptly and began to look ahead. A pool of blood stretched out beside him in a vast room with a gloomy atmosphere, with dead people hanging from chains. The alleys of the room slowly took shape, revealing an ominous landscape, as if he had entered a nightmarish world where reality and nightmare intertwined. These men were held on chains, shackled in agonizing poses, attached to the ceiling and bolted to the pool. Their emaciated bodies seemed like toys in the hands of a merciless nightmare palette, creating a ghastly scene where suffering became a symphony of darkness and the sounds of moans and faint cries took on echoes of hopelessness. In a pool of blood lay a creature, a monster devoid of human nature. Its mangled form looked like the result of a macabre experiment, an interweaving of nightmarish visions and its own alleys of disaster. Curved limbs covered in a vile liquid seemed to flow from the darkest corners of the mind. The creature's eyes, which radiated despair, seemed like windows into a vast hell. A gloomy aural contour was created around it, as if darkness itself was surfacing from this pool of misery. Waves of blood spilled over his body like the living pulse of a nightmare, creating an atmosphere of menace and unfathomable terror around him. The power of this spectacle was so awesome that time seemed to stand still, and every glance was filled with a deep sense of helplessness before the inexplicable horror lying before his eyes. Dong-gu sat there, puzzled and not understanding who these people were and why he was seeing all this. Suddenly, a blue hand with fractured fingers emerged from the pool of blood, as if rising from the infernal abyss. This mystical moment added mystery to the already strange happening, and Dong-gu's gaze became even more intense. Dong-gu, sitting in amazement, suddenly noticed a blue hand starting to quickly reach for him. The astonished guy was startled, trying to pull away from this ridiculous and creepy ghost. However, suddenly someone shouted his name, and this sudden defiance made his hallucination stop. He saw the old world again, and Sai was standing in front of him. Kai shouted, asking if he was okay. Gu, still dazed from the nightmare, tried to regain a sense of reality by answering his friend's question. At that moment, the boundaries between reality and hallucination began to disappear. Gu, still dazed from the nightmare, tried to regain a sense of reality by answering his friend's question. At this moment, more guys ran up to him and asked if they could call an ambulance. Excitement and anxiety filled the air, creating an environment of tension and urgency. Dong-gu got to his feet, holding his head, and said that no ambulance was needed. His words sounded vague, as if he was still struggling with the effects of the strange visions. With a look of determination, he tried to reassure the people around him, but there was still a trace of the recent horrors in his eyes. He turned his gaze forward to where someone was screaming, and he felt as if he were in a hazy border between reality and nightmare. The sounds of screams penetrated through the shroud of perception like the whisper of the night wind, and he felt that in this moment time was becoming rubbery, as if stretched, creating a strange sense of what was happening right here and now. His gaze, as if floating in the darkness of the unknown, absorbed the contours of what was happening. But it was increasingly difficult to distinguish reality from fantasy. In this twilight zone, screams and cries became like echoes of fear, echoing in his mind as if he was in a labyrinth where the boundaries between reality and nightmare melted away, leaving only the flickering light of the vortex of the unknown. A teacher came in here. He opened the door and asked the boys why they were shouting. The teacher looked forward very angrily and tensely, as if trying to understand what was going on in this mysterious scene. A tense silence hung in the room, as if the air was filled with uncertainty and mystery, and everyone was waiting for clarification. The teacher, like a detective, stared tensely ahead, as if his gaze could penetrate the veil of mystery of the scene. In his eyes flickered an unwavering determination to unravel the mysteries, as if he were confronted with a riddle that only a select few had been trying to solve since the beginning of time. The boys standing near the open crates were the focus of the teacher's attention, who, like a judge raising his gavel, asked them the reason for this unusual sight. His voice sounded wary, like the notes before the great unraveling, creating an atmosphere of expectation around him, as if every word could be the key to unraveling this strange incident. He ran up to them and began to scold them, angrily asking them how and why they had opened the lids of the boxes. His eyes were filled with rage, as if he were ready to explode with indignation. Glancing at the crates again, he shouted tensely, demanding that they be closed back up. The air was filled with tension. One of the students came up to him and said that all these corpses had the same deformities. The teacher, not believing his ears, tensely asked, "What did you say?" Whispers and growing alarm rang out in the room, creating an atmosphere full of mystery and mystery. The teacher began to explain that it was for them to participate in the competition. He quickly added that they should quickly pick one corpse and leave the place, as if emphasizing the urgency and strangeness of the current situation. Tension hung in the room, and the teacher's decision only added to the mystery of what was happening. Donggu apologized to the teacher and said that they would clean it up immediately. His voice sounded determined to rectify the situation, although fear and bewilderment were also reflected in his eyes. The teacher, maintaining a tense gaze, nodded approvingly, but there was still a long simmer of discontent and anxiety in his eyes. The boys started closing the lids while the teacher stood there making sure they got it right. Donggu was thinking about his parents, Lucan, the competition, and these strange hallucinations. There was tension in the air, as if every moment could lead to the unraveling of a mysterious situation, while the boys acted as instructed. He looked down, realizing that there must be some connection behind this medical competition. The rain continued to fall, creating a gloomy mood all around. The boys finished their work in the freezer and returned to the university, leaving behind a mysterious impression, as if they were carrying a mystery that had yet to be solved. They brought in a corpse and put it on the operating table. The boys said that the recently sent human remains looked too strange. The teacher listened attentively to their story and agreed with their observations, adding more mystery to this mystical incident. He corrected his glasses and said that this singularity provides a good opportunity for the boys. The teacher explained that the country offered such chances and they should take advantage of them to expand their knowledge and skills. There was a tense expectation in the room, as if the teacher, despite the strange circumstances, saw this as a challenge and an opportunity for his students. The students looked at the teacher and listened attentively to everything he said. Their gazes showed not only some puzzlement, but also interest in what might lie behind these unusual learning events. The tense silence was interrupted only by the teacher's words, and at that moment it seemed that every word he spoke contained a clue to the mystery. He looked at the corpse lying on the operating table and began to talk about the details of what was happening. The teacher explained to the other students the intricacies and importance of conducting research on such unusual remains, emphasizing that this unusual opportunity could open new horizons for their professional development. Teacher Gu said that he had no idea whether the deformity was congenital or acquired. He emphasized that students need to examine this cadaver more quickly to find out the key features and proceed with detailed analysis. Teacher Gu told them to feel free to say anything during the process. The boy expressed his feelings by telling the teacher that it was very difficult for him to get started. At this point, a tense silence resumed in the room, where deciding the first step on the path to figuring it out seemed to be a challenge for each student. The teacher got angry and shouted to him that he and his partner should go first to the corpse. All the students stood on the sides, creating anticipation, and then the two guys bowed in front of the corpse and began their work. Tension hung in the air, as if the moment of approaching the corpse felt like a key moment in this unfamiliar study. The boy turned to the teacher, in whose eyes shimmered the wisdom of experience. In answer to his question about how to create the perfect cut line, the teacher revealed to the boy the magic of his knowledge. The clear instructions were like colors on a palette, translating into vivid strokes of meaning aimed at illuminating the complex shadows in the world of art. The teacher, like a wizard in his workshop, advised the boy to watch every movement of his hand. In that moment, like a mosaic being assembled into a colorful work, the importance of remaining attentive and careful became not just a piece of advice, but a hymn to creative precision. The guy, inexperienced, started cutting by intuition, realizing that he needed to work faster despite his difficulties. Passionate about the process, he tried to reproduce the cut line, following his intuition and trying to keep the rhythm of the work. The room felt tense, as if each movement brought with it a new hope or expectation. He started to cut, but his scalpel was too blunt to cut through the body easily. The boy stopped, looking at the instrument in his hands in surprise, realizing that he was going to have to deal with this challenge. The teacher, watching the process, raised his eyebrows and a perplexed silence hung in the room. The head woman approached him, trying to distract him from his predicament. A brand new, sharpened scalpel gleamed in her hands as she showed him. There was an instant sense of relief in the room, as if the new tool brought hope for a more favorable turn of events. She started cutting instead of the boy. The headmistress leaned over and carefully made the incision, paying attention to every movement as if experience and confidence were her own. A relieved tension hung in the room as the students realized that experience and the supply of a new scalpel had come in handy to overcome the difficulties. She carved a large square into the corpse's hand with light but sure hand movements. The headmistress demonstrated professionalism and precision as if this was not her first time. The students, watching the process, appreciated her skill, and the room resumed quiet whispers and sighs of respect in front of the head girl's skills. She took off her mask and told everyone that she could not feel the superficial fascia. There was a note of alarm in her voice, and the students' eyes filled with excitement again. This unexpected turn of events added mystery to an already difficult task, and the room once again felt tense and awaiting the next step. She said that after piercing the skin, the resistance of the knife changed rapidly. Her words added even more complexity to the understanding of the case. In the room, students exchanged glances as they tried to make sense of this new information and understand what was happening to the corpse. The teacher told her to use the standard depth and keep cutting. She listened, nodded, and went back to work, following the instructions as if she were going to solve the mysteries of this unusual corpse. The room was tense again, but now with a hint of determination and eagerness to solve the mystery. As she continued to cut the brush, suddenly she pressed it, and a huge amount of dark red blood spurted out. The shocked students looked at what was happening, and whispers broke out excitedly in the room. Donggu, taking off his mask, very loudly and harshly shouted to her to be careful. The girl, frightened by the sudden shout, tried to cover herself with her hand. She was very frightened because Donggu shouted to her, and this hand situation gave her even more fear. In response to the sudden occurrence, the girl covered herself protectively with her hand, stepping back. A tense silence hung in the room. amidst which shocked expressions and tense glances were discernible, creating an atmosphere of waiting for events to unfold.